Hi everyone, Steve Lee here with Simply Tax. I'm a CPA based out of Chicago, Illinois, and on today's video, we're going to be going over the newly issued guidance by the SBA for PPP loans that were $50,000 and under. If you received a PPP loan greater than $50,000, you can still watch this video because there's a lot of great information in regards to what is included in the loan forgiveness amount and in that calculation, as well as what types of documentation you should expect to have to submit along with your PPP forgiveness application. All right, so let's get right into the newly issued guidance released by the SBA for PPP loans that were $50,000 and under. Okay, there's a lot of information here, so I'm going to be referring to my notes. So we're going to break up this video into three parts. Right? We're going to talk about what is the new news and what's changed. Number two is we're going to talk about the actual forgiveness application of the new 3508S that was just released by the SBA. And then thirdly, we're going to talk about what supporting documentation you need to include when submitting your forgiveness application. So let's get started right away. As we're talking about this form, you might want to just pause this video and refer to the information section below. In the information section below, you'll find links to the actual form 3508S. You want to print out that form or follow that form as I'm talking about it, in this video. So I would pause this video, print that out along with the instructions if you would like, and then follow along. So the 3508S is the form that we're going over at this time. So the two big changes that the SBA released guidance on was the first one was that you won't be negatively affected if there was a fluctuation in the number of full-time employees that you had on payroll during the covered period. Previously, when the PPP loan forgiveness regulations first came out, you were employers who dropped in the number of employees that they maintain on payroll during the pandemic were negatively affected in terms of the eligible loan forgiveness amount. That's not the case any longer with the PPP guidance that was just released for loans $50,000 and under. Under the new form 3508S, that full-time equivalency, the FTE, that won't negatively affect you if that dropped from 1.0 to whatever it used to be, whatever it might have dropped to during the pandemic. That won't negatively affect your forgivable loan amount. This is huge because a lot of businesses saw a lot of fluctuation in terms of their staff because whether it was the lack of hours or closing your business, or even the large unemployment benefits received by many team or staff workers that incentivize them to possibly not show up for work. So the FTE will not negatively affect you as an employer if that dropped during the pandemic, which is great news. Number two is if there was an adjustment in salary and wages during the pandemic for certain employees that you did have on payroll in the past, that would have negatively affected you if there was a drop in salary or wages. But not anymore under this new guidance released by the SBA this morning. Even if there was a drop in salary and wages for certain employees on payroll, that won't negatively affect your eligible loan forgiveness amount. Okay, so those two pieces are huge for small businesses, right? Because many of them, once again, saw drops in employees during the pandemic. And number two, maybe had to decrease the salary for those that were on payroll, right? Maybe due to reduced hours or just financial circumstances. So those two items are no longer detrimental if there was a drop for small business owners. All right, so let's go right into what is on this new loan forgiveness, right, for the form 3508S. Okay, so remember, this is the third form that was released for loan forgiveness. The first one, the long form, is the 3508, the regular. Then there's the 3508 Easy, okay, and then now there's the 3508S. S probably means simplified. That's what I'm assuming. One thing I wanted to mention is that guidelines in regards to forgivable PPP have not changed, right? That equation or that ratio of 60-40, so 60% at a minimum has to have been used for payroll costs. And we're going to go over what payroll costs means. And then 40% has to have been used or at most could have been used for non-payroll costs. And we're going to go over what that means. So that 60-40 ratio is still the same, irregardless of this new guidance released by the SBA. So let's take a look at the 3508S. Okay. If you have the actual application in front of you, it's going to mirror the 3508 Easy form that was already released. A lot of it is the same. The top portion of that form is exactly the same. The bottom portion of the 3508S does not have that forgiveness amount calculation any longer, right? I would still refer to this forgiveness amount calculation because it's a nice little chart to help you organize what are the forgivable amounts that you're applying for. Okay, so let's take a look and let's go over now what are some of the eligible costs related and what can be forgiven. So as we know, 60% of the PPP should have been used for payroll costs. What are payroll costs? Let's go over that right now. Compensation to employees, including items such as salaries, wages, commissions, or similar. Remember, with salaries and wages, depending on what your cover period was or the cover period that you choose between either 8 weeks or 24 weeks, that changes the amount of eligible forgiveness per employee that you have on payroll, as well as for owner compensation, owner employee compensation. Let's do a little review of what those numbers are. Remember, if you had an employee on payroll and you're applying for PPP forgiveness and you've chosen the 8-week cover period, your max eligible forgiveness per non-owner employee, once again, non-owner employee for that 8-week period is $15,385. If you've chosen a 24-week cover period, the max eligible forgiveness per non-owner employee goes up to $46,154. So that's basically 3 times what that 8-week cover period versus 24-week cover period. And that makes sense, right? Going from 8 weeks to 24 weeks is 3 times. So you go from 15,000 max eligible per non-owner employee all the way up to 46,154 per non-owner employee that you can apply. For owner employees, that's people that own greater than 5% of the company and also are classified as employees. So this is typically S corps, right, or C corps even. Your max forgiveness amount, if you chose the 8-week cover period, is $15,385. If you've chosen the 24-week cover period, your max forgiveness will be $20,833. So it's a little bit larger, not so much of a jump compared to the non-owner employees that we just talked about, but still there's a bump. So in general, what we've seen with clients is that it's most beneficial for you to choose the 24-week cover period rather than the 8-week cover period. So you can maximize the loan forgiveness amount per employee and for you non-employee owners out there as well. So I would highly recommend choosing the 24-week cover period, even though you spent it all over 8 weeks. Another thing that counts as payroll or salary is cash tips for those in the restaurant business or those employees that are based on tips. Payment for leave, right? What does leave mean? Leave is defined as either vacation, family, medical, or sick leave, okay? It says here on the instructions, please do not include leave covered by the Families First Coronavirus Response Act. So if you received assistance in regards to employee leave from the Families First Coronavirus Response Act, do not include that on this forgiveness application, okay, under the payment for leave section. Another thing that qualifies as payroll is allowance for separation or dismissal of employees, just like severance pay. Housing allowance or stipend for employees, employer payments for group health care benefits, including group health care coverage paid. Okay, so remember, this is employer paid, never employee paid. So whatever the employer has paid out, That would also be considered payroll, okay, under the payroll category. So you can include group healthcare benefits. You can also include employer payments for any retirement benefits. Okay, so 401k or matching contributions. Remember, the employer portion is only includable, not the employee contribution. And then lastly, payment of state and local taxes assessed on the compensation of employees. So here in Illinois, for example, there is Illinois unemployment insurance, right, that we have to pay as employers for our employees. That would be an eligible payroll cost, right? So any type of state and local tax assessed for employee payroll. One key point here is when you're calculating the compensation for forgiveness, when it comes to benefits like health insurance and retirement contributions for owner employees, do not double count them because those are already included in salary for the owner employees. Okay, so you want to subtract out basically any health benefits or any retirement contributions paid for owner employees. Okay, so you don't want to double count that. So you have to take that out because it's already been included under compensation for the owner employees. So what are some of the non-payroll costs that are eligible for forgiveness? Remember, this is the 40%. Remember, 60% of your PPP funds need to be used for payroll costs, eligible payroll costs, which we just went over. The other 40% at most can be used for non-payroll costs. And there's certain eligible non-payroll costs. Let's go over what those are. The first one is mortgage interest on real or personal property. Okay, a key point here is that these are for mortgages that were in effect before February 15th, 2020. So before February 15th, 2020. So if you signed or you purchased something after February 15th, that mortgage interest is not eligible for forgiveness if you use PPP funds for that. Okay, so before February 15th, 2020. And that's going to be a consistent theme with these next three categories. Okay, for mortgage interest, it had to have been mortgages that were put into place before February 15th. The next category for non-payroll eligible cost is rent or lease payments for real or personal property. Okay, so these are for lease agreements that are before February 15th, 2020. Once again, just like the mortgage interest, this is for lease or rentals that you went into before the pandemic, basically. So if you signed a new lease or renewed your lease during the pandemic or upgraded, your business space, that unfortunately would not qualify, for the PPP forgiveness. This is for lease and rentals before February 15th. The last category is utilities, right? Utilities is also another eligible non-payroll expense. This includes things like electricity, gas, water, transportation, and I'm going to go over what that means, telephone and internet access. The electricity, gas, water, telephone, and internet access, that's pretty straightforward. These also are contracts that had to have been put in place before February 15th, okay, so before the pandemic. Commonly asked question is, what is transportation fees, right, under utilities? This is a very common question. I too, as I saw this, was not sure what it meant, because commonly when you see transportation, you think gas, auto expenses, mileage potentially, but that's not what it means. The IRS has released guidance in terms of what is transportation costs under this utilities category. And let me read what that means. So under utilities, this is a fee used as a financing mechanism that treats the transportation system like a utility. Residents and businesses pay a fee based on their use of the system, that could be, like the utility system, rather than a tax on the value of their property. So the transportation fees are generally found in smaller cities. In Washington, Idaho, Utah, Colorado, Texas, Missouri, and Florida are common states that have cities that assess a transportation fee. What this means is that if you've been counting or using fuel or gasoline or mileage as a qualified expense, under transportation or utilities, you need to remove that from your forgiveness application. Okay, so transportation, once again, is not gasoline or auto expense or mileage. It is basically a fee for using the transportation system like utility. Okay, that's a very common question that we get, and I also had that same question. On the 3508S, going back to that form, they're also going to ask you, did you receive an Economic Injury Disaster Loan, an EIDL loan advance, right? Or EIDL advance, not the loan, just the advance amount, which is typically $1,000 per employee that you had when you applied, right? So up to $10,000. So for example, let's say you had 5 employees when you applied for the EIDL advance, you typically probably receive $5,000. Okay, so the EIDL advance, the reason why they ask for that amount for how much you received is because that's subtracted from the loan forgiveness for PPP. Okay, so they don't allow you to include that. So let's go over an example. So let's say you received an EIDL advance of $5,000. Okay, you had 5 employees, 5 full-time employees, and you received $5,000 of an advance. And let's say your PPP loan amount was $45,000. Okay, so you received a $45,000 PPP loan. So now what it is the max forgivable amount you can apply for will actually be only $40,000. So remember, it's $45,000 was the PPP that you received. You received $5,000 of an EIDL advance. You're going to subtract the advance from the PPP loan, and that net amount is going to be your max forgivable PPP loan amount, unfortunately. Okay, so you have to take out the EIDL advance if you received one. So now that we know what are the eligible expenses for forgiveness, for payroll costs and non-payroll costs, what are the documents you're going to need to submit with this application to receive forgiveness? And we're going to go over that in detail right now. Okay. So after you've gathered all your expenses, after you've filled out the top portion of the 3508S form, you're going to start to need to gather some of this documentation here. Okay. And what you're going to need to prepare and to attach. First, payroll documents to include. So this is to justify the minimum of 60% of your PPP funds, right, for forgiveness. You're going to want to include bank account statements or third-party payroll service provider reports documenting the, which show the actual amounts that you paid in terms of compensation to employees during the covered period. Okay, so if you use commonly payroll services like ADP, Paychex, or Gusto, you should be able to go into your client dashboard to download to show the actual debits and actual compensation amounts that you paid out to your employees during the pandemic or during the covered period. The second set of payroll forms you're going to need to include and attach are payroll tax forms, right? Both the federal and the state level during the covered period which you're applying for. So the federal forms would be the 941, right? The quarterly forms. Right? And then for the state forms, like for Illinois, like that example, Illinois has unemployment insurance, right? You're going to want to include that form, the UI form as well. So any type of payroll tax forms you are required to file during the covered period in which you are applying for loan forgiveness, you want to include and you have to attach those amounts to justify and to show the bank and the SBA that this is how much payroll you actually paid out during the covered period. And thirdly, they're going to want you to include account statements for any employer contributions to any employee benefits, right? So this is the health insurance and the retirement plans. So if you contributed to an employer-sponsored health plan, you're going to want to attach the account statements as well as the account statements for any retirement plans that you set up for your employees and you made contributions to during the covered period. Okay, so those are the three. The first one is, once again, the bank account statements or third-party payroll service provider reports documenting the amount of actual cash payments made. Number 2 is the payroll tax forms, both the federal level and the state level, if that applies. And thirdly, any account statements related to employee benefits, whether it's health or retirement accounts, right? You want to include those 3 forms to justify the payroll costs that you're applying for forgiveness. All right, let's go down to the non-payroll expenses you'll need to prepare and attach to justify and to receive forgiveness for, let's say, at most 40% of the PPP funds. Okay, as we talked about, the mortgage payments is the first category, right? The first non-payroll expense that's eligible for forgiveness, right? And once again, please remember, only the interest is includable, right, as a forgiveness amount. Not payments related to principal, nor are mortgage prepayments applicable. So remember, just the interest portion of a mortgage payment is forgivable, okay? Not the principal and not any type of prepayments you might have made with the PPP funds. Therefore, you're going to want to prepare a copy of the mortgage lender's amortization schedule and receipt of payments made during the covered period. So the amortization schedule is basically going to map out what is the principal portion of a payment versus the interest portion of a payment, as well as the receipts or the canceled checks for the payments, the mortgage payments that were made. So you're going to want to prepare those two pieces of documentation to submit. Number two is the business rent or lease payments, right? You're going to want to prepare a copy of your current lease agreement and receipts of payments made during the covered period. So you're going to want to, once again, prepare for any kind of rental payments or expenses that you're including in the forgiveness application. You're going to want to include both the current lease agreement as well as proof of payment of those lease or rental expenses. And the last thing is business utilities, where you're going to want to prepare here are the invoices paid during the covered period, as well as receipts of those payments. So you want not only the invoice from the utility companies, as well as the payment receipt or proof of payment during the covered period. You're going to want to attach all of those documents when you apply for forgiveness. One big thing on the application that the SBA just released as well is that you're going to want to maintain all this documentation, the application plus all the supporting documentation, calculations, everything for at least 6 years after the date the loan is forgiven or repaid in full. Once again, 6 years after the loan is forgiven or repaid in full. So let's go over an example. Let's say your loan is forgiven, you submit everything that we just talked about, and the bank and the SBA forgives your PPP loan. And let's say it's 2021, February of 2021, next year. You're gonna have to hold on to that documentation for up to 6 years, okay, afterwards. So at least till February 2027. So what I recommend is for you to scan those documents, application, and to email it to yourself. So it's in your email folder, your personal email folder, so that whatever may happen, you have it at your disposal. You know, if you have a Gmail account, you probably won't run out of space, right, or memory. So I would scan it, send it to your Gmail account and have it there. So remember, you need to keep all this documentation for up to 6 years, at least 6 years. So as you can see, this new form 3508S, there's still a lot of work that needs to be done, right? Whether it's calculating the eligible forgiveness amount, whether it's gathering documents that you're going to need to support the forgiveness amount, there's a lot of work that still needs to be done. But remember, the two big changes, you know, not being penalized for a drop in your full-time equivalency or full-time employees, that's a big one. That makes this a lot easier. And number two, any kind of drop in wages or salaries that you might have experienced for your employees during the covered period, that also won't detrimentally affect your forgiveness amount or your eligible forgiveness amount. So, you know, this is great news that the SBA released, and it's great that they released further guidance for these types of loans, right? Loans that are $50,000 and under for all you small business owners out there. Okay. You know, I know that this was a longer video compared to my other videos, but I think and I hope that, you know, you were able to pick up some information, and this will help you fill out the 3508S, right, and receive full forgiveness minus obviously the EIDL advances that you might have received. Okay, remember to share this video with any other business owners that you know received a PPP loan, you know, that was under $50,000. So thank you again for watching this video. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and share the video, as well as look at the information and the links that I have down below. Till next time, please be safe, and thank you again for watching this video. Goodbye.